Hello, listeners! We are absolutely chuffed you've decided to join us. Grab a packet of biscuits, brew a warm cuppa, and curl up for a wholesome American conversation about quintessential British food from everyone's favourite baking competition. Please enjoy Hats Off to Bake Off, an amateur baking podcast.
Hello and welcome to Hats Off to Bake Off, an amateur baking podcast. My name is Nick and I'm here with my friend Malory, and as always, we'll be going over the signature, the technical, and the showstopper of Episode 9 from Collection 1 or Series 5 from the Great British Baking Show. This is the semi-final. We're so excited. We'll be discussing our versions of the bakes and learning about the science of gelatin from Malory. So this episode, semi-final, we've made it through 9 episodes of the podcast. We're just going to keep going.
I cannot believe it. I cannot believe that we're here.
Right? It's
it doesn't
kind of wild.
Feel real.
The bakes are getting very hard.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know how we're doing them, but
I feel like the level of difficulty of the bakes hasn't been a linear increase. Like, I felt very comfortable with everything that I did. Rye rolls were a little weird. That one was tricky, I'll admit. But really last week a little bit, and this week was the first week that I was like, oh my God, this has gotten so much harder so quickly. It's like an exponential rise in difficulty and time consumption. Oh my goodness.
As much as I moaned about pastry, at least that one's straightforward. I knew what I was doing. But this one was just like, what is this? I have no idea. I've lost all good ideas for bakes to make here.
Wow. But it was really fun to see our bakers in the tent rise to that challenge. I think it's something that I'm always surprised by every season without fail, is how at the very beginning of the season you see everybody making these like passable cakes. You know, they're okay. I could make one. That feels simple. But then as it goes on, and sometimes it's just that they're learning also. Like, they might not all be starting out at a place where they could have finished or come into the semifinal, but by the semifinal, they've gained enough skills to be comfortable there. And I think that's amazing that they're using these weeks to learn and become better bakers as well. And I think, honestly, I've been experiencing the same thing with, even though I'm only doing one of each bake, it's really forced me to learn a lot about what I'm doing. And I think that's made my baking a lot better.
I was thinking exactly the same thing. How do they come up with these deep, complex, and interesting flavors week to week? And they knocked it out of the park this week. They did a really good job.
Yeah, I was so excited.
We'll talk about our bakes very shortly, but I think we did a pretty good job this week.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we both really brought our A game this week. I can't wait to tell you about it. I've never been more proud of anything I've ever made in my entire life, and I've made some weird shit.
And by the time this episode comes out, you should have seen it on our Instagram, so do check it out because I'm so unbelievably impressed by Malory.
We need you to bask in our glory. You don't pay us money to listen to this podcast, but a little of your attention and a few Instagram likes, it might bring actual tears to my eyes.
Just comment, please. Just give us comments. It's all we ask from you.
Give us praise. We thrive. We live on it. We need it.
Or, no, here, even better, forget Instagram. Tell your friends to listen to the podcast. That's
there
what you
we
should be
go.
doing.
Actually,
my birthday was 2 days ago, by the time you listen to this, a week ago. But that'll be your birthday present to me, is telling
Happy
your friends about
birthday,
the
Nick.
podcast. Thank you. And this week's bake was my birthday cake.
Yum.
But before we get there, the bakers had to make 2 different types of baklava.
I love baklava. I was so excited. Happy that I didn't have to make this challenge, because making phyllo is something I never want to try. But I love eating baklava, watching them make it, and looking at their flavor combinations. I thought was really interesting because every time I've eaten baklava, it may have been in different shapes, but it was always pretty much the same flavor, usually pistachio, sometimes almond, pretty classic flavor. So it was really exciting to see them break out of that traditional baklava box, if you will.
I've never had baklava before, actually.
Could it be the tree nuts, Nick?
I was going to say, it really shouldn't be shocking, but...
Listeners, if you don't know that, Nick is allergic to tree nuts at this point.
Have you been paying attention? Did you skip ahead and listen to this episode?
It's fine. It took me several months to remember, so...
I think we have on recording, you'd be like, wait, what? What? You're allergic?
I know. Nick has made me a actual list of things he's allergic to because they are numerous. And I have a shit memory.
Don't worry, so do I.
I feel a little bad.
But I haven't eaten baklava because it is full of nuts. It's full of honey. It looks and sounds amazing, both in the description of it and when someone eats it and you bite into the crispy, crunchy phyllo pastry. I don't think I've even had phyllo, honestly, let's be honest. I don't think I've had a recipe that's even included phyllo because...
I'll have to make you a spanakopita.
Oh, right. Like, other than those two, those are the only two things I can think of that have phyllo in them. I don't think I've had anything with phyllo in them.
Wait, I don't think so either. That's pretty much what I think of when I think of...
There's got to be other phyllo desserts that or bakes or anything else.
I am doing a quick Google, and it's a lot of like meat rolls or pies.
Oh, okay.
So it's used like a traditional pastry dough would be, except for that it's super thin sheets and crispy.
Like so you just like layer it up and up and up and up. So instead of having lamination, you just have phyllo. That makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, like really big lamination, I guess, is kind of...
I mean, you're putting butter in between the layers, so that makes sense. I guess it's basically the same thing. Mm-hmm. Well, any favorites from the tent this week?
Definitely. I loved the idea of Nancy's to use muesli. I thought that was crazy original. It's never something that I would have thought of. I just really would have loved to taste that because oats is never something that I would have thought to throw in there, but it seemed to work really well. And then also Chetna's looked so unique and pretty. Her swirls and then her chocolate one. I wanted to eat those very badly.
I was super impressed by Chetna's chocolate and orange. Even if they were non-traditional or if Paul had an issue with them, I thought both of hers looked really cool and her swirls were really, really interesting.
Paul and Mary can be a little bit wishy-washy on whether or not they want people to stick to the traditional, challenge or push the envelope or, try something new. I feel like it's a really hit or miss whether or not bakers get praised for doing something different or chastised for doing something different. And I feel like both Chetna and Louie got chastised for their different shapes. They were like, is this baklava? And I was like, you asked them to present something different. This is like why Norman left, is because he wasn't challenging traditional ideas enough. So I don't know. I was a little bothered by that. I was like, listen, these both taste delicious. It's fine.
They always get excited when they find a bake that they've never seen before. But then you get something fun. Like I thought Louie's idea of the little cups was really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I didn't see how it I couldn't taste how it turned out. I'm sure it still tasted delicious. It just was a cool idea that I wish could have gone out a little bit better for Louie.
Exactly.
And then Richard, if we're talking about things that pushing the boat out, Richard went with the most classic flavor combo for baklava as far as I know. He did rose and pistachio.
And then executed it perfectly. The rose is maybe new. I feel like I don't remember rose from the baklava I've eaten, but that's not necessarily indicative of what's traditional. But yeah, I mean, he did it. That's very well. And they always say that if you're going to do traditional, you have to execute it perfectly.
His other one was just almond. He did a rose and pistachio and an almond baklava.
Oh my goodness.
I guess he just did it superbly well because...
Yep. I believe that.
I mean, it's Richard, let's be honest.
I know. Four-time star baker.
A 5.
Well, spoiler alert, excuse you.
If you're listening to this episode, you should have watched the episode by now. So when we mention it later on, it should not be a surprise. Mm-hmm. If you were making baklava, even though you said you probably would never want to, what would you make?
So it's a great question. And like I said, I really do love the traditional pistachio honey baklava. If I was going to try and do something a little bit different, I might try a date and walnut combo and either do chopped up dates, or if I was worried that would make it a little too wet, I might just incorporate dates into the honey syrup that I would use to drench it. And then my other idea came to me. Have you been to probably not. The Choux nuts that's in the Boston Public Market. I think they might have a couple other locations, but
I've definitely heard of them. I've definitely visited them, but I'm like, I can't eat any of this.
I can't eat any of that. I'm obsessed with them, and it's my favorite thing to do because you can get free samples. And then they have their little baby bags that are still expensive, but I every once in a while, pretty much every time I'm there, I'm not in the public market very often, so every time I'm there, I pick up I think it's 3 for $10 little bags.
Everything in the Boston Public Market is incredibly expensive.
Just so expensive, I know.
Pro tip for any Boston listeners, go to the end of the day and get the apple cider donuts that are the offshoot crappy looking ones.
Yes.
They're really cheap and they're heckin' good because they're still
so
donuts.
Good. Because they're still donuts. Yeah, Choux Nuts has this. So they've got basically, if you're unfamiliar, they have a bunch of different crazy flavors of roasted nuts, and they're all fantastic. Highly recommend. They have a limoncello one that's really
What?
good, a lavender, it's limoncello lavender. Love it. A bunch of different ones. But one of my favorites that I just think is so unique and that I'm addicted to is they've got, I think it's like a sweet sage and honey cashew. I can't remember if there's another flavor in there or not, but I would love to try and do that. I think sage can be such a weird and fickle flavor, but it worked with those nuts so well, and I think it had honey in there as well. So I'd love to play around with that and see what I could come up with for a baklava with sage in it as well.
Well, as we've already said, I can't eat nuts. The one nut I can eat is peanuts. So that's, I think, basically the first thing I went to. Is I was like, what can we do with peanuts in a baklava? And I found these recipes for honey and crunchy peanut butter baklava, which...
That sounds good.
Honestly, honey and like pastry dough and peanut butter just sounds good anyway. So I think that would be pretty good. And then I was trying to think of other flavors that I could eat that would go well. And one that came to mind was I looked at, okay, what if we changed the honey syrup to a different kind of syrup and did some other kind of fruit or other kind of flavor in there? And one of the first things that popped up on Google was a cherry syrup. So I was like, what if you did like a chocolate cherry kind of Black Forest baklava? I don't know.
Ooh.
It might be good. You can put real cherries in there if you wanted to. And the other thing I looked up when I was looking at no-nut baklavas was they put a lot of, like you said, dates. They have a bunch of no-nut recipes that just use like dried fruits and whatnot. And
That makes sense.
so I went with other fruit flavors. So I thought change the syrup again, make it a caramel, try an apple caramel maybe.
That would be
If you
really
wanted more
interesting.
crunch, you could put some crumble in there. Like there's so many variations of just like gooey centers and crispy pastry. I think any one of them could have gone really well. So then we come to the bake I made. This was my birthday cake because I ate it on my birthday.
Love it.
And this was the technical challenge when they had to make a schichtort.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to call it a shit tort.
Shit tort? No.
I cannot tort. I cannot pronounce it any other way. I really just sat there for about 5 minutes before we recorded this episode. Schick tort.
Can you do the guttural sound? Like l'chaim?
It sounds, no, I cannot
Oh.
really. I struggle with it. Also, it just sounds gross if I try. It's not good.
It's a similar sound. It's not the same, but yeah, I think of it as like that sound. Schichtort.
It's a shit tort.
But it's okay.
I'm sure it tasted better than shit. But I really
it's okay.
am
I'm thinking of
on
how
that
many
one.
ways can we put a shit joke into this.
And
I think
really
the first one has
not
to be.
intentional.
I'm pretty sure the first one has to be, Mallory, your German pronunciation has always been Schicht.
Thank you. Schicht. I cannot make it happen.
But you know what wasn't shit? This amazing sort of cake thing was real heckin' good.
Okay, I need you to tell me all about it. It was so much fun to watch our bakers puzzle over this one. And then also I did a quick Google and looked this one up. It was apparently originally cooked on a skewer, basically a rotisserie.
Like on a spit.
Yeah, on a spit. And then roasted over a flame or next to a flame. It was like a rotisserie cake. And then instead of doing layer by layer, it was like poured on, right? And then spun. And it was called, I think the word comes from tree cake. Is that correct?
I've seen that. Definitely, I think whenever you look up a schichtort recipe, it comes up with schichtort parentheses tree cake.
Yeah.
So it makes total sense. And I've seen, you can look up on YouTube, there's some really cool videos of these like rotisserie style cakes. They're super cool looking. Or, I'm not sure if it's the same, but it might be very closely related. If you go to an H Mart, I did not say Kmart this time. I always say Kmart. Go to an H Mart or other like Asian, Korean grocery store. You can find these weird looking rings that are just like a slice of a ring with a circle in the middle. It's just layers of cake. Oh, they're so unbelievably good.
Ooh, I've never tried one.
They're real bad for me because there's a ton of carbs in them, but they're just like these little ring cakes and they're super delicious because every Asian cake is delicious. I made this the traditional way that the bakers made. Actually, I'm not sure if it's the traditional way.
It was
spit
adapted
might
to be
be
easier for home cooks who don't have
There we go.
an open flame in their
I
kitchen.
made it the non-traditional way, and it ends up looking a lot like a crepe cake. So crepe cakes were really popular in the last few years, where you cook a bajillion crepes. There's so many recipes out there of like 100-layer crepe cake,
Yikes.
where you bake 100 crepes and then you stack them up with whipped cream, and that counts as your like quote-unquote cake. And so I ended up using a pan that was slightly bigger than it was supposed to, and you ladle in this cake batter that's actually shockingly fluffy and light. So you see in the episode that they're whipping egg whites and putting those into the batter. And so you get this like fluffy, foamy cake batter that you're not expecting. And so unlike a crepe, where a crepe is this unbelievably thin, basic batter.
Almost rubbery. Like bad crepes are rubber.
But good crepes are spectacular.
True.
But you can spread them really thin because they're just like water at that point. Whereas this one has like some like heft to it because there's the egg white in it. And so trying to spread that layer out just enough was god darn nearly impossible.
You need like an offset spatula, but like attached to a pole that you can then just like dip in and spin around in a circle. Really, a crepe, one of those things that they use for crepes would be perfect.
I was going to say a crepe thing is they have them. They're this
I've
basically
used one
these little
before. They're
T-shaped
amazing.
sticks. They're really cool. And by a professional crepe maker. Is that a thing? Professional crepe maker kind of just swirl it around. But this was...
Sorry. God, that was awful.
Yeah, it's just really hard to spread out. I got to this weird point where I guess I didn't have enough batter because I had a bigger pan. And so as it bakes, it shrinks a little bit. And as you put each layer on, it like shrinks and shrinks. And so you're eventually like pouring it off the sides of the cake. And like it's a mess on the sides. And I was like, this is a disaster.
Wow.
But it didn't taste like a disaster. And it worked surprisingly well. We saw the bakers use... Well, like Chetna had put hers in for like 5 minutes for the light side and 7 for the dark ones. And that's shocking because the recipe I used, you just set it to high temperature and it was 2 minutes for the light side and 3 for the dark.
I think she didn't have hers all the way up. I think later, I remember she said that it was taking too long and then she turned her oven up. So I think that was why.
Which, looking at the way they're talking about the broiler, I was very confused because I think
the grill,
they must have more variety in their ovens, whereas
setting.
mine is like high or low. That's all there is.
Yeah, I think my oven is like all of the oven temperatures, and then broiler is one single setting that you can't do anything with. So glad you did this one.
I did this one because I thought it was something really cool and I wanted to try baking under a broiler, and it worked really well. And it's super unbelievably fast when you have it set to high. It cooks very quickly. Only a minute difference makes it light and dark. So I had some nice light dark layers. It was really cool. And I only got 13 layers in, but I think I'll still count it as a win because it was a rough cake to make and it turned out so beautifully.
I was so amazed looking at the pictures that you've sent me. And listeners, I highly encourage that you check out our Instagram post on this. Nick's was beautiful. The layers are clearly defined. His decoration on top was inspired by Nancy's passion fruit tart from a few episodes ago, and it looks amazing. He sent me this and it absolutely blew my mind. It was right before I made my entremets, so I knew I had to do a good job with my entremets so that I didn't let Nick down.
Well, that's too kind of you. It was a really fun bake to make, and the glaze looked beautiful and shiny. I got not one, but 2 people asking, oh my gosh, how'd you make it so smooth? How'd you make it so shiny? It's just a really cool recipe, but I do have to say, it's shockingly not that sweet. There's only about a cup of sugar in the entire recipe.
Wow.
I mean, I think probably their recipe has a lighter chocolate, so they use like a 30% chocolate, whereas they're using like a 70. But still, there's very little frosting when you cover it. I'm shocked it even covered the sides.
Would you serve it with like a little bit of whipped cream or something just to lighten it or add a little sweetness, or did you like it the way it was?
I started adding a little bit of extra frosting because the recipe I had made like 2 cups of frosting and I used about half an ounce.
Oh, wow.
But just the white frosting. I started adding something else to the side because it wasn't very sweet, and I totally would in the future, or even if I could like up the sugar content, just because it's a very strange kind of bake. But for people who don't love sweet things, it's actually probably a really good idea. And it is unfortunately the first cake I've had to eat with a fork and knife because it has a very crepe-like texture. There's no crumb, there's no sponge to it, so it doesn't like break apart like you'd think. But it's still a very beautiful looking cake. I was impressed by my Choux torte. I don't think it was schick.
I was also impressed. It wasn't schick. Was that? Did I do it? Schick.
Does that a t sound to the end? You're fine.
Okay.
Let's move on from the schick.
From all this shit. We're tired of this shit.
I mean, we might get into some terrifying waters soon, but it's time for tea. It is unbelievably hot in Boston. There is no way that I am drinking tea right now. I mean, I guess I could be drinking iced tea like a heathen, but I just have my good old Coke Zero.
Like a heathen? What about iced tea is like an
Hold on.
American?
I would say, in America, it's totally cool and I love my iced tea. If you're from Britain and listening to this, then I'm a heathen.
Okay.
Because no one puts ice in their tea over there, as far as I'm aware. But I did want to give a little shout out today to any of the bakers that are still baking in this unbelievably hot day. I did have one friend of mine show off one of their more recent bakes. It was a milk bar cake that was like, you know those confetti cakes?
Oh, yeah.
Where they have like the frosting, there's no frosting on the outside. They made all the frosting and the cakes blue. Had little like Lego explorers on top, like looking for alien rocks.
What?
It was so cute. I'm giving a shout out to Luca Locke, who's a DM from TPK Roleplay. You can find them on Twitch. I thought the cake looked beautiful.
That sounds
it was
amazing.
Super cool to share that. And they were all very impressed by the cake I made, so I thought I'd give them a shout out as well.
Yay.
Are you drinking any tea on this unbelievably hot day?
Ice water, in fact.
Look at you like an adult.
Is that
Shocking.
adultish? I'm just trying to cool down. I don't deal with heat very well.
Any amount of water is probably adultish.
Nick,
I should drink more water.
Do you not drink water? Now I'm worried about you. Nick, please
On
be
occasion.
drinking water. My Instagram bio is literally stay hydrated. Like, I will die on this hill. You need to be drinking water.
I'm trying to convert to seltzer instead of sodas.
That's a good step.
And that's a step in the right direction,
Yeah.
but like I hate seltzer, so it's been problematic.
Well, my favorite thing, tip, you can cut this out. This is a personal tip for you because I'm actually worried about you. I have my favorite drink when I like want something fancy that like feels nice but is basically still water is like I'll take a 32-ounce mason jar and I'll squeeze half a lemon into it, and then I'll grab some like you can pick up some fresh mint and like sort of like squeeze a leaf or two in your hand and then like drop it in or like muddle it and mix it around and do like ice water, and it makes like this lovely lemony minty drink that feels really fancy but is also super hydrating.
I feel like that's just more iced tea, isn't it?
It's
just minus the sugar.
well, yeah, it's but no tea and just lemon.
Well, you're not steeping the mint, I guess.
And you could put honey in if you like really want it to be sweeter. Honey would be perfect.
That's not the opposite of the issue at this point.
That's true.
However, speaking of things I also hate, that's a weird way to jump there. We're coming up on a very exciting section that Mallory's going to teach us about gelatin. So I thought for our time for tea question today, I'd ask this question that I am terrified to ask, which is, have you served a Jell-O salad lately?
No, but I do know what a Jell-O salad is because I am from the Midwest and they're very prevalent here. For those of you who aren't familiar, a Jell-O salad is Jell-O, usually cut up into cubes, sometimes not. Often served alongside like maybe whipped cream, other sort of sweetened things, usually canned fruits, sometimes just the Jell-O. I think it was adapted. I think there used to be like older savory versions of Jell-O salad, but they're like if you look up Jell-O salad on Pinterest and it's going to be like a bunch of sweet like.
Oh, no, Mallory. This is far worse than that.
Is it the savory? Is it the like old school?
It is the savory ones. And
yeah.
if you look up on the next slide, I have a listing of Perfection salad, which is basically a Caesar salad put into a giant ball of Jell-O.
Not a
ring
fan.
around the tuna, garnished with early endive and radish roses, which is lemon lime Jell-O with like onion and cucumber and celery, and a whole can of tuna. Or by far the worst, seafood mousse made from Jell-O, which is decorated to look like a giant fish. I am terrified. I'm so confused. Hey, mid 1900s, what did you do? Why are you?
I love how it says.
Oh, I guess right there in the top it says the Midwest.
Yeah, so Nick's got some pictures that are clearly cut out from different cookbooks or maybe newspapers. But right up top, it says the Midwest. So like I'm in prime Jell-O salad territory. And I will say the closest that I've gotten to making anything similar to this is that my family is obsessed with the movie Christmas Vacation. It's a bad movie. I'm not defending it. We watch it every year on Thanksgiving to get like hype for the holiday season. And one year we went so over the top that we made the lime Jell-O served at the Christmas dinner in the Christmas Vacation movie, which is a lime Jell-O that in the movie has cat food in it and it looks like it's surrounded by barbecue potato chips. So we did a giant ring of lime Jell-O and added Lucky Charms and then did a circle of barbecue potato chips, and it was basically just for show. I think we tried it for fun and then was like, no.
The idea of lime Jell-O with anything sounds awful to me.
I can't wait to
like
change
lime.
your mind, but traditional lime Jell-O, yeah. Especially with all of that.
I'm just looking at these very terrifying photos, and listeners, please do look these up because they're absolutely true and absolutely terrifying. But they're just, why? Why, world? Why? Why would you do this? Why was this ever a good idea? It was a different time.
So speaking of the horrors of Jell-O, I really did want to dive into gelatin because when I was making my entremets, I realized that pretty much 3 of the 5 layers to one of them, and then the filling for the other was made using gelatin. And aside from that horrific lime Jell-O mold that my family had created in the past, I had never used gelatin before. And so I really wanted to dive into it. And it actually is kind of fascinating and really unique in its sort of culinary use. So,
with a bit of a terrifying history, I'm sure we'll talk about.
It's not as bad. I mean, really, it depends on just your relationship with animal food and eating the whole animal. But I am not somebody who shies away from that. And I have a lot of admiration for traditional recipes that use more than just the meat flesh of animal and actually make use of the other parts. So for me, this was exactly what I expected and very interesting without being at all gross. But I don't know what your relationship with meat and meat foods is. So
no, I love that idea of using the whole animal, and like there's that image out there of the pig where it's like, here's where all the pig parts go to, and like every part of the pig is being used somewhere along the food chain. And I did just look up this urban legend of the gelatin horse hoof thing, so we'll get into that.
Yeah, we will. So just to start off at the basics and then get sort of more specific later on. Gelatin is what is known as a hydrocolloid. These are also known more simply as gums or thickeners. Hydrocolloids are basically a long molecule chain that is particularly good at interacting with water and sort of stopping it up to thicken it. So it's a long molecule that grabs a hold of the water molecules and stops them from moving around so much.
Stop that water.
Yeah. Just stay. It like hugs. It just really, it wraps the water molecules in a big hug.
Aww.
Yeah. This is a much nicer metaphor than some of our previous ones.
One day we'll have gelatin hugs as a t-shirt on our website.
Oh my gosh, Nick. Just saying.
I'll work on it, don't you worry.
Okay, great. Other popular hydrocolloids that you might have heard of, and these often appear like ingredient lists for popular like processed foods that we're used to just because they can be very useful for anything from like processed dairy foods like yogurt or anything like that that need some sort of thickening agent. So other ones include carrageenan, agar, locust bean gum, pectin, xanthan gum. There are a few others that I didn't list, but most of them come from natural sources. Most of them are derived from, gelatin is an animal product. Carrageenan and agar come from seaweed. And then there's a few different plant sources in there as well. And gelatin in general has so many culinary uses. For my entremets alone, I used it in my coconut mousse, both my lime and my mango gelées, and my mirror glaze.
Ooh, gelée. Look at you.
Gelée, I know. I honestly felt like such a dingus saying it because it's spelled Gelee.
Well, it's
but
French.
I just felt like I was saying, right, I felt like I was saying jelly like an idiot. Like gelée. It's a jelly.
It's jelly.
It's a jelly. But anyways, you can use it, obviously. Marshmallows is sort of a famous gelatin product. American puddings, yogurt, gummy candies, Jell-O, of course, panna cotta, ice creams, and then even savory treats like xiaolongbao or soup dumplings.
Oh, okay.
Use gelatin cubes to create the sort of soupy effect that can be cooked into a dumpling.
Because they're not really like full of soup. They're full of like soup gelatin.
Right. So they're full of gelatin cubes, and that when heated, we'll get into why, but it basically turns back into a liquid at anything higher than room temperature.
I think they kind of mentioned that at the in the episode too. Doesn't Louis say something about that?
Yeah, so you'll see Louis in the episode releasing his pomegranate jellies from the mold by soaking them in hot water, and that's traditionally how you would remove any sort of gelatinized substance from a mold, is by putting it in a little bit of warm water to just melt the very, very edges of it.
And then, as he says, if you put it in there for just too long, it'll turn back to liquid.
Exactly. First, I really want to get into where it comes from, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, as you mentioned, with the whole hooves thing. I don't know if you said that about, where gelatin comes from.
Definitely. I've definitely heard that Jell-O is made from horse hooves, and that's terrifying.
It's incorrect. It is not true.
That is so good to know.
Yeah.
So happy to learn that.
Have you heard of collagen? It's sort of all over the health news.
I was to say, just kind of in adding collagen to make your face look pretty.
Right. So collagen is a really important protein. It's one of the most abundant proteins in our bodies. It's often referred to as the body's scaffolding, just because it's so present in all of our connective tissues. So our skin and our cartilage. I think I read somewhere that it makes up about 30% of our skin's content is collagen. And I think it's about also 30% of all the protein in our body is collagen. So it's everywhere, but specifically in connective tissues like skin and cartilage and things like that.
We're hurtling down a terrifying path here, though, Malory, if you're going to start saying that this is in our gelatin.
Well, not human skin, but if you've ever made bone broth or gravy, or if you've taken home beef or soup leftovers, you're probably familiar with how it turns into a solid gel, right? After being in a fridge. That's due to the collagen that's present in the animal bits being cooked down in the broth to create gelatin. So really all gelatin is partially hydrolyzed collagen. And hydrolyzed sounds intimidating. It's really just a fancy word for being broken down by water. So when you cook bones or skin or connective tissue in water, if you cook it in water, those amino acid chains break down slightly more to turn from collagen into gelatin.
So gelatin comes from collagen.
Yep, gelatin comes from collagen. And you may also see products like hydrolyzed collagen or collagen hydrolysate. These are also basically slightly more simplified versions of gelatin that have just been cooked and reduced and broken down even a little bit more.
Okay.
So commercial gelatin, where everything that, Jell-O products to just cooking gelatin, leaf gelatin comes from, is sourced pretty much exclusively from the bones and skins of animals slaughtered for meat production, usually pigs and usually pig skin. So it's a byproduct of the meat industry. So I was raised vegetarian, but we weren't picky and we ate things that were made with gelatin because we saw it as a byproduct.
But you weren't vegan.
Right. If you were a vegetarian, if you were strict vegetarian, you might not consume gelatin just because it's still an animal product and you can't exactly use an animal's skin or bones without. Yeah. But it's usually in the context of our larger meat eating industry, it's considered a meat byproduct. So we're still using those what would otherwise be waste products from the animals to create and produce collagen. It is not made from hooves. Hooves contain a completely different protein called keratin, which from your fingernails. We've got the same protein there. It's not a thickener. Don't worry. Gelatin is not made from hooves.
I mean, it's still made from pig bones, so I'm sure people will still be a little freaked out, but I like the idea that it's made from using the whole body.
Right. Exactly. That's why I'm totally into it. And I think the myth about hooves could be due to the fact that the first culinary use of gelatin was likely in 15th century Britain, and it involved the boiling of hooves for a very, very long period of time. So there's still a little bit of collagen, I think, in there, or probably up almost around what would be the wrist area, maybe not the hoof itself.
So they're just using much smaller amounts of bone and thinking it was from the hoof.
Or maybe there was a little bit coming from the hoof, but not a significant amount. So it was a very intensive process. And so it was fairly ineffective. And then by the 17th century, there were other methods that were found to extract gelatin from animal bones and then sort of distill it down into its more concentrated form.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. So the way it works, which is really fascinating to me, it's like I said earlier, it's basically a big old water hug. Gelatin is made up of these long amino acid strings that have like sort of hydrogen atoms sticking out. Like sorry about this. Imagine a centipede, and each of the centipede's little stubby legs was a hydrogen atom.
Okay. And then the body would be the oxygen?
There's a bunch of different other atoms going on, but the hydrogen's what's important here because the hydrogen will form hydrogen bonds with water molecules. The thing to know about hydrogen bonds is that they're weak bonds. They don't hold up very well to stressors like heat. So when you heat gelatin that's been dissolved in water, those hydrogen bonds break down. And so any sort of solidity that is there disappears. And so that's why when using gelatin, we add it to a heated liquid. Like both times I made 2 different gelées for my 2 entremets. And both times I heated the liquid that would be used in my gelée. And then I added the bloomed gelatin in afterwards. So before you add it to the hot liquid mix, whether you're using powdered gelatin or sheet gelatin or leaf gelatin, it's sometimes called, you want to bloom it or basically soak it in a small amount of cold water first to sort of let it start to expand, and that way it just prevents any sort of lumps of solid gelatin and allows for easy dispersal and dissolving into the water. So it's also what gives gelatinized foods that sort of silky, melt in your mouth texture, that really smooth texture. It's because as soon as it heats back up to room temperature, those hydrogen bonds break again and it just like dissolves and melts in your mouth.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
Right?
So like just even body temperature is just enough to dissolve the gelatin.
And release it from those bonds. Yeah, pretty much what's happening once you're cooling a hot substance or a hot liquid that has gelatin in it, as it cools, gelatin wants to sort of settle back into the structure it held as collagen, which is a triple helix. And it can't do so completely. And it's also super long. So it will like double back on itself. All the different long chains are sort of like linked over each other, and it creates all of these sort of junction zones. If you think back to our gluten episode, these are very similar to the crosslinks we mentioned there. And the same deal with gluten. The more junction zones, the more crosslinks, the better it is at retaining, in this case, water instead of air. But basically, the better it can hold and solidify the liquid into a gel.
And so this is when our gelatin hugs come back. They're hugging the water by folding back into these shapes and solidifying it, right?
Yeah, and it's like, okay, this is actually still a great metaphor, because then imagine if you were to both get really hot and sticky and sweaty and you were like, oh God, this is gross. And then you let go of the hug and then the water is free again.
Oh, okay. I like this.
So
it's some great metaphors
a big,
here.
old sweaty hug. You're welcome for that mental image.
I don't need a mental image. I'm feeling hot and disgusting and sweaty.
I know.
I'm just stuck to my notebook now. I'm like, ugh.
Yep.
As soon as we are done recording, the AC is turning back on.
Back on.
Anyway, any more fun facts about gelatin?
Yeah, I do have a couple things to know about using gelatin. Just some fun tips that I always like to throw in, because once you understand the science, I feel like it's a lot easier to use it properly in a bake. And I actually made the mistake of doing this research after I made my entremets, because I fell victim to one of these common mistakes myself. But first of all, salty or acidic ingredients tend to soften gels, so you may need to use more gelatin.
Gotcha.
If you're working with, for whatever reason, a salty, like maybe if you were doing a sort of soup dumpling or other sort of savory gelatinized.
Ring around the tuna.
Yeah, if you were going to do a giant tuna salad that was salty, you would want to probably use more gelatin than you would for a sweet thing or something without acid or salt. But sugar or cream helps firm up gels. So sugar will just help it pull that water out and increase the strength of the hug. And then cream is just a thicker mixture overall. So that'll just thicken the whole gel itself.
It'll be giving gelatin hugs to the fat molecules and the creams, I assume.
Yeah, I think it's less. I really should have looked into more about how fats interact with it, because I'm always interested in the interactions between proteins and fats. It can be so wonderful and diverse, but I did not find a lot of information about that. I think it's just because it's more viscous and more thick to begin with, it makes it easier.
It's fascinating.
And then here's what I wish I would have looked up pre-entremet, is that certain fresh ingredients such as peaches, pineapple, papaya, mangoes, melons, kiwi, figs, prickly pears, and ginger contain enzymes that are called proteases, which digest the proteins in gelatin. So if you're unfamiliar with the concept of an enzyme, enzymes are basically little digestion. Think of them as like hungry
enhancers.
Yeah, they like digest things and break bigger things like proteins and sometimes fats down into smaller compounds.
Anything that ends with an ASE is probably an enzyme.
Probably an enzyme. Mm-hmm. So one of mine was a mango gelée, and lo and behold, it did not set properly, even though I did follow the recipe. And so as a result, yeah, these gels made from these fresh ingredients may not thicken properly. What you can do to stop this, if you really want a pineapple gelée or jello, you can boil the cut up ingredients for 5 minutes, or you can use canned fruit that's usually already heated during the canning process. So I think my problem was that I did a combination. I had a mango puree, which I cooked to heat up, and then I added in chopped mango chunks to give it some texture, not knowing that it was futile and it would just eat the gelatin.
Did you end up making it again, or did you just
No, I just dumped it in there. It was fine. It didn't look as beautiful as my lime and coconut ones, but it tasted amazing just the same. So I'm not sad about it.
Good to know for the future.
Yeah. And now can I tell you about my entremets? I really do want to tell you all about them.
I can't wait. Please do. Please do.
Okay, listeners, I made entremets. I'm so excited. I cannot believe it went so much better than I thought. I spent way too much time on it. I spent pretty much an entire night and then the next morning working on them. But boy, I have never been more proud. And they were surprisingly not as hard as I thought. They were very time consuming. And obviously, like I just said, my mango gelée didn't work great. But really, if you have patience and a lot of time on your hands, which, listen, folks who have reduced hours or just aren't working right now during the quarantine, and you have some time to spare, great baking project. 10 out of 10 would recommend. So let me walk you through these 2 entremets that I made. I made a coconut lime entremet. I bought 2 fancy little entremet molds online. And the base of both of them, I did a cardamom sponge because y'all know I love cardamom.
It wouldn't be Malory if there wasn't cardamom.
I know. And part of the reason Nick and I were talking about this challenge before, and I said to him, I was like, well, I haven't made anything with a sponge since episode 1. I feel like this is very much more of a Nick thing. Like, I honestly think if we sort of stuck to what could be expected of us this week, I would have made baklava and you would have made entremets.
Yes.
So I wanted to switch it up, and I'm really glad that I did. So these coconut and lime entremets had a base that was a cardamom sponge.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sort of big general cup part of it was a coconut mousse. And so I made both of my entremets in a mold, which I know that Paul was weird about entremets that were enclosed and not open, but I looked up a lot of entremets for inspiration, and all of them were made in a mold with some sort of either glaze or chocolate coating. And then once you cut into them, that's where you saw the layers.
Who was it that said that? I think was it Nancy who said that idea that you want to see the middle, the cross sections, the most important part?
Yeah, Nancy did one that was closed off, and Paul gave her some shit for it, and I was confused.
Some shict for it?
Some shit for it. We're going to need to completely rename the title of this episode.
Oh, are we allowed to swear in our...
No,
well, I guess we're not swearing if we say
fine.
shict.
Never mind. But anyways.
It's like using schist. Well, he gave shict to Nancy for not using an exposed entremet. He then later on said, oh, it's very bold of you to like show off the outside of your entremet. And I was like, excuse you, Paul, can you make up your mind?
Yeah, I don't know.
So anyway.
Yeah, I stuck with what I'd seen a lot online, and so I ordered 2 different molds and had, for the coconut and lime one, I filled the mold with the coconut mousse and sort of brought it all around the upside of it, so it was like the mold itself was completely covered in coconut mousse, and then I dropped in sort of a little cylinder of my lime and mint gelée that I made, which is basically like a fancier jello that I flavored with real ingredients instead of a jello packet, but really think of a jello cube, and then had a layer of toasted coconut and then the coconut sponge, which then got, flipped upside down. And then I poured a mirror glaze on top of it. This was my first mirror glaze.
How'd it go?
They're messy as hell, but it looked so pretty. Oh my God. I can understand why the world was taken by storm. They're amazing.
The mirror glaze trend was a big thing a year
huge.
Or 2 ago.
And now I finally understand why. So worth it. And then my second ones, I did chocolate mango. So I essentially did the same thing, except for instead of a coconut mousse, a chocolate one. Instead of a lime gelée, a mango one with mango chunks. And y'all already know how that turned out. Same sponge. And then on the outside of this one, I did tempered chocolate.
Ooh, look at you.
I know I'm going to share my secret with you guys in a second because I found it online and I cannot believe it worked the way it did. But basically, so for these on the inside of the mold, before I put the mousse in, I coated them with the chocolate, let that set, then added the mousse, then the gelée, then the sponge.
Oh, look at you, cheating all the way.
I know. So here's my trick for tempering chocolate. I did it, drumroll please, in the microwave.
What?
I did it in the microwave.
What?
Apparently, I looked this up.
You're the heathen now.
I know. Listen, I'm never going back though. I'm never actually tempering chocolate because remember we tried for your Florentines and it didn't happen and we spent so much time on it and it's never worth that again for me.
I think you were really supportive when we did that.
I thought it was going to work. I didn't know.
Great.
I hadn't looked into it yet.
You're like, yeah, that totally tempered. And I was like, no, it really did not.
It's not. I had no idea.
Didn't. The truth comes out. Malory thinks it did not temper right.
Yeah, now I know better. You told me. You taught me. So tempering chocolate, this will be a whole nother science section, so I won't get too deep into it. But basically, what's happening
next season they do a whole chocolate episode. So.
Hell yes, perfect. So what happens basically, as always, you're rearranging protein structure, but this time I think it's actually fat. I think it's the crystals that form in the cocoa butter, but those sort of melt and come out of their original beautiful temper that they're in when you get the chocolate bar or chocolate chips or whatever that you're working with at 95 degrees. If you microwave it at low time increments on low power and stop when it gets to about 90 degrees Fahrenheit and just like keep stirring until all the rest of the chocolate belts have melted, you never allow it to leave its original temper. You've never broken the temper to begin with.
So you don't have to go up and down and back and around. And
right. You just don't go above 90 degrees.
Okay.
95 is really the big cutoff, but like just keep below that. And I was able to bring mine up to about, I think I got to like 91, 92, and then just like stirred it, and then waited for it to cool off a little to be a better working temp. But it worked like a charm. It tempered perfectly, beautiful snap, easy to pour, again, really messy, but it set in my molds perfectly. They had a nice thick but not too thick chocolate shell all the way around the outside. I was absolutely amazed. I thought tempering chocolate, I thought it was all going to go horribly wrong. I really wanted my outside of my entremets to be covered in it, and so I thought like I was never going to be able to get them out of the molds. It was going to be a messy, horrible, awful day for me, but it went really, really well, and I'm still not over it.
Okay, I promise next time I make chocolate, I will attempt this microwaving method.
Helps to have an instant thermometer on hand. If you don't, you shouldn't be tempering chocolate anyways.
Yes, also that. So did they taste delicious as much as they looked delicious?
Yes, my family has been raving about them. And I had a bunch of extra ingredients because I took a bunch of really random recipes and just shoved them into the different molds. And so we've been eating, like I made little leftover like layer cakes of leftover sponge with the gelée in the middle and then the mousse on top. So we've been eating entremet scraps since I made them, and we still have plenty of leftovers.
Entremet scraps sounds so good.
So yummy.
I don't know if I could ever make an entremet that sounds and looks so good as yours because I ran out of ideas. I was like, I have no idea. Cannot think of a good entremet. The one thing I've written down is s'mores because I love s'mores. But like the idea of an entremet is you want as many different layers and textures and different techniques as you can get in one go. And I honestly can't think of a whole lot right now. If I had a lot of time, I might be able to think of some good entremets. But
do you follow Matt Adlard on Instagram?
I do, and I have seen him make some very interesting looking things.
Yeah, he's a big inspiration for me, and a lot of the way that I made my molds and just like the way that he's assembles his bakes, because he does all those videos on his Instagram. I was like, oh, okay, that made me feel like I was like, okay, I understand how this should be assembled. And also I think he's got some really good flavor ideas.
There is a bunch of videos online, like the satisfying videos, where you can watch chefs make entremets, but they have so many different like techniques and so many different like
right, because you can do
anything. You can do so much. It's amazing what you can think of. The video for the chocolate cigar has come up in my YouTube recommended like 19 times.
So many times.
I'm sure I could come up with some really cool ideas. I know the exact video
you're talking about. That's how famous that video is.
Look it up, listener. It's wild, but it looks so good.
Have you seen the clock one?
No.
There's
I'm
a chocolate clock
right after
one.
this call.
Yeah.
There's one that I've seen a dozen times that's like 2 donut-shaped cookies with like a hole in the middle, and they like are filling this like weird ring-shaped entremet and like covering the outside, and I'll look it up and send it to you.
Okay,
it's
that one I don't
cool.
recognize, but I might have seen it.
But yeah. And that brings us to the end of our episode.
And
we conquered the semifinal. We conquered
really did.
Patisserie.
I think we both would have made it into the final just based on our bakes alone. But if you cannot guess who the star baker is at this point, you haven't been listening. It's Richard again for the 5th time.
Again.
I do think he deserves it every time, but I also just love the other bakers so much that I wish that they also got Star Baker, because I think everybody really brings it every week. And I'm always, I don't know. I guess the moral of the story is I would not be a good judge on the show, because I'd be like, you all get Star Baker. I loved everything. Please keep feeding me.
I think Louis did a really spectacular job this episode and was probably unbelievably close.
Yeah, I think Louis really had
Richard
it.
knocked it out of the park with just how precise his bakes were this week. I'm looking at a picture now. I didn't even realize he'd used like fun decorated chocolate on his.
Oh, yeah.
But the polka dotted rings on all of those.
Yeah,
I would
that's
be
true.
like kicking over the tent if I tried to do that.
But
I
like
could-
Louis' little pomegranate jelly rings, I loved those.
They looked like unicorns to me.
Really? I really
Look
liked
back at the
them.
episode. They have little horns on them. They look like unicorns.
Okay. Well, I loved them.
They were really cool. However, as we must always do, it breaks my heart to say goodbye to one of my other favorite bakers.
I have actual tears in my eyes right now.
No.
This season came out in 2014 and she's
You're
still wildly
still not
successful.
over it.
I'm not over it. I love her to pieces.
I mean, you said she's wildly successful, and she totally is. Look up at Chetnamakan. I think that's how you pronounce it, on Instagram and Twitter, or go to her website, chetnamakan.co.uk, or check out her YouTube, Food with Chetna. A little history on her. She grew up in India and actually studied to be a clothing designer. According to the BBC website, she once had her own clothes label.
What?
So mind blown. She has 2 children, and she said that she really started to get back into baking when she was starting to bake their birthday cakes, which is super cute.
Wow.
And she gets a lot of flavors from her memories of baking with her mom. She also pulled out this really amazing quarantine haircut where she like shaved all her hair off.
It looks so
And,
good.
I am living for this look. She is
Makes me wanna shave my
thebomb.com. Speaking of thebomb.com, she's also released 3 books celebrate her Indian upbringing. The first one was The Cardamom Trail, which is right up your alley, Mallory.
I really need to buy it. I don't know why I haven't yet.
Then she went on a tour of India, looking at the best street foods in India across 4 famous cities. So that's called Chai, Chaat, and Chutney.
Oh my God.
Again, looks really cool. And the most recent one, which again I'm shocked you haven't bought yet,
I know.
is Chetna's Healthy Indian Vegetarian.
It's on my list.
It just came out in 2019, and she's very proud of it, and it's very, very cool.
Wow.
Her celebrating Indian cooking evidently doing very well for her, because that is a spectacular line of books. Highly recommend them. Go check them out.
In real love.
Support and love Chetna.
That brings us to the end of our episode today. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week, we've finale made it to episode 10. Next week will be, you guessed it, the finale and the last episode of the season. I can't believe it, frankly. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, please tell your friends and family to check us out on social media or subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. Every subscription and download helps us out tons.
We would love it if you would tweet about us or share how much you liked the show. You can find us on Twitter and on Instagram at HotBowPod, as well as on Facebook at facebook.com/HotBowPod. That's HOTBOPOD. You can find links to all of our social media accounts, and you can sign up to be notified whenever we release an episode on our website, hotbowpod.com. One last time, HOTBOPOD.com.
The links we use to make our entremets and our chic or tort, whatever, are posted on our website. And you can find them by navigating to episodes and then look for the post on this episode and try it out for yourself. If you do make it, let us know. Either way, you deserve a badge of honor because they were both insane.
Doozies. I'd also like to give a hats off to Peter Lalish, who wrote our intro and our outro music. You can find Peter on Fiverr as PW Lalish, as well as on Bandcamp under the name AKLF. As Sue says, I could just pop this on my face and I'd look 20 again. On your marks.
Get set.
Bake! The box.
The
Thinking outside of the
baklava.
box.
The baklava box.
Okay, one in 10 jokes is going to fail. If not 5 out of 10, if not 9 out of
Most
10.
mine.